Good morning, good afternoon, evening, night, whatever time of day that you're joining us. I'm just glad that you're here. My name is Beth Purdue. I will be your storyteller for today, and this is Forgotten Threads. So, today I wanted to talk a little more from the heart. I didn't want to necessarily read all of these facts and things. Florida has specifically always been a topic in our mind. I never even visited Florida until I got married and moved down here. Today, I want to discuss two main things. Yes, we're going to be talking about Cypress Gardens. We're going to be talking about the history involved in the creation of Cypress Gardens and what we can still go and see today. But I also want to talk to you about a historical record, keeping a historical record with your family, doing that research, talking to your grandparents, talking to your parents, getting the story down. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the process by which I start researching. So it usually starts with something like this. Our postcard for today. Later on, I'm going to reimagine it. It's going to be like this so you can see it a little bit better. But this is of Cypress Gardens. And if you know anything about Florida entertainment industry, you're going to recognize these beautiful dresses that they're wearing, these antebellum outfits, and how indicative it was of Cypress Gardens specifically. But I usually start with an image or I start with a letter or something that someone has written down, maybe an old book that someone has drawn a picture in or wrote a note to someone. I'll give you an example of something that I found that I want to look more into. I found a set of books. They're actually up on the top of the shelf up here. I found a whole set of books, and they were during World War II of year in review books. They would come out with these large, almost like encyclopedias that talked about or discussed that year and kind of looked back on it. What did we learn? What happened? All of those historical things. And in between each one of these books was a letter. Sometimes there were flowers with them, sometimes it was just a letter. Every single one of them were opened, except for the very last book. The very last book had an envelope in it that had not been opened. And each one of the letters or the cards were from a husband to a wife. Now, my mind goes in a thousand different directions. Usually goes to the worst, saddest thing that could happen. Maybe he died in World War II and now she's, opening these letters every year and all of a sudden now she can't open this last letter. I don't know. But those are the type questions that start going through my mind. And then I go from there to, well, what was happening during that time period? What were the people like? What jobs did they have? All of that stuff. So my mind immediately, when I saw this postcard, went back to number one, why did they wear these dresses? How did this start? What kind of flowers do we have growing here? And are all of these a part of Florida? And oh, by the way, the name sounds familiar because there's a connection to my family. Um, Also, I don't know, this was never sent, but it says that it is courtesy of Cypress Gardens. So obviously, somebody took a visit, brought a postcard back home with them, possibly something they really loved or thought it was beautiful, brought it back home with them, never sent. Maybe they had it framed. I don't know. There's so many different questions you can ask, things that will help you connect those little threads throughout history. So let's get started with that. Cypress Gardens was actually created in 1936. So, this guy, Dick Pope, and his wife, Julie, were actually sitting around up north and they were looking through a Good Housekeeping magazine and they saw that there was an article about this particular man who had allowed people to tour his home and he was able to generate like a side hustle. He created a yearly income of around $30,000 and they thought, well, this is a pretty good idea. We could do this too. They came down here and actually bought 16 acres of swamp muck. And he became known as the Maharaja of Muck. But he proved everybody wrong because it wasn't long before he was turning a profit as people were coming from all over to see these gorgeous gardens. Probably one of the first questions I had about the postcard and about Cypress Gardens specifically was, where did the poofy dress idea come from? This is how the story went. So, Julie was sitting in her office one day right after a freeze had come through. It was about 1940, and she was sitting in the office and she realized that near the entrance of the park that the plants had died because of the freeze. And so in a panic before they opened the park, she decided, I'm going to grab up all of the ladies in the office. I'm going to throw on these gowns, these beautiful antebellum dresses with the gigantic hoop skirts, and have them stand out there in front of the dead plants to make sure that no one notices that they died. Well, Florida does have freezes, but if you have ever seen a freeze, that is not exactly how it works. So I started digging into this and I'm like, number one, um, a freeze doesn't just kill one little section and then not something else. There may be other plants that are more prone to dying in a freeze than others, but it doesn't just kill plants around the entrance of something and then nothing else. Number two, who has just gigantic dresses with hoop skirts lying around the office? These are all questions, legitimate questions. So, as I dug into the research process of this, come to find out, there is no actual proof. There is no actual proof that she didn't just fabricate this, that this wasn't just another stunt. The Dick Pope was known for these type things, and so this seems kind of like in line with some of his marketing skills that he would make up a story, throw the dresses on. He's stuck with the story, and it has stuck this entire time. There's another story that also goes along with this. The park was not only known for these beautiful ladies in their dresses, but it was also known for the water ski show that was played there. And apparently, that was some sort of an accident as well, according to them. Some soldiers during World War II saw an article and a picture of someone skiing, and they somehow thought it was associated with Cypress Gardens and that Cypress Gardens had a water ski show. So, with hearing this news, Julie, once again, pulls up all of her family and friends. They slap on some bathing suits, get out their skis, and they decide that they are going to put on a show. That particular night, approximately 800 servicemen showed up and they put on a show. I don't know if this was a planned thing. I don't know if it was another, Dick Pope marketing scheme, but it worked and it stuck. And the ladies in their gigantic hoop skirts and antebellum outfits stuck, and they have stayed around, or they did stay around. And this brought in other clientele, which brings me to this lovely lady. Look at her. Isn't she beautiful? This is Esther Williams, and if you've never heard of her, she is amazing. Go get one of her movies, watch it. It's really incredible, and you'll learn some Florida history just by watching one of her videos. In fact, as I was looking through her book that I got sucked down a rabbit hole last night in reading, you see this picture right here. This is actually taken in Cypress Gardens, and this was a Florida-shaped swimming pool, and I will post a picture of it right here. Really cool. Dick Pope had this made. It cost back then somewhere in the neighborhood of like $50,000 to create the swimming pool, and it was created for one of her movies that she made there in the park. Williams learned to water ski at the gardens for the film. The pool, now called the Florida Pool, was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2014 when it was actually refurbished, and it is preserved inside of Legoland, Florida today. Williams also returned in 1960 for the TV special Esther Williams at Cypress Gardens, filmed in color, a rarity for television at the time. Dick Pope knew how to not only court the media, but Hollywood. And Esther Williams became a fixture there and with her films. She created 2 movies there as well as one special. And she actually fell in love with her husband there. And this book is really interesting because it covers a lot of that, a lot of the history that involves Cypress Gardens. You may not know it, but the movie industry was huge here in Florida. In fact, it was the first Hollywood before Hollywood was even a thing. But I think you're kind of seeing how the process works. You know, you get involved with just a single image, you start to discover more about that image. You then start to remember and think about stories that you were told, which brings in my mom. And so my mom is actually on vacation at the moment, and she was visiting my sister, but I remember a story she told me when I was a kid about Cypress Gardens. I called up my sister and I was like, hey, can you just ask mom what she remembers about her parents telling her the story about them visiting Cypress Gardens. What was it like? What did they experience? Anything she remembers about it. So, my sister recorded my mom talking, and my mom was telling the story about how all of them were grown up. Her twin sisters and her were older now. Of course, they could take care of themselves. And this was about 1964. And my grandparents came down here for their one and only vacation, and they chose Cypress Gardens for whatever reason. My sister actually asked my mom that, why did they choose Cypress Gardens? Probably because of advertisement. Florida has some fantastic advertisement. We discussed that earlier in one of our previous videos, how these postcards became a way of life. They were a portal into what life was supposed to be like here, and in many cases actually was. Um, Esther Williams had filmed movies here. 1953 was one of her biggest films created here, especially here at Cypress Gardens. Miami was a huge thing. Movies were being filmed in Miami. So Florida was not some faraway concept to most of the United States. It was a tropical wonderland and places that they only could see on videos. And so more than likely they saw an advertisement about Cypress Gardens and wanted to come down here for a visit. Drove all the way down from Virginia to the middle of Florida, and they visited Cypress Gardens. They stayed here for a little while, and then they went back home. Years later, my mom is telling me this story, and then of course I go and visit it, and it's just neat to draw those connections, to have those little forgotten threads that are spread throughout our lives. After a series of ownership changes, Harcourt, Bush, local investors, the park actually closed in September of 2009. When I was reading about Cypress Gardens, Universal actually had a park here that had things like the Flintstones, had attractions for the Flintstones, had attractions for Murder, She Wrote, which is one of my favorite shows. Fun stuff that I am looking forward to learning about. We're also going to be talking about in the future, maybe for our next episode, Florida's Hollywood connection and how Florida was actually the very first Hollywood. So stay tuned for that episode, and I'm looking forward to doing some research, some things that you can go and see today that are still from that early time period. Like 1907 was one of the first production companies that came here to Jacksonville. You can still see some of that stuff is being refurbished, and I hope to visit it one day soon and take some videos and show you more about it.